COVID-19 has very much been on our minds. It's changed everything we do and who we are and why I'm here like this today. And I haven't heard a lot of good jokes lately. It's not that much that's funny. But I did hear one that I have to share with you. Listen carefully. A rabbit, a priest, and an imam walk into a bar. The imam is going to have water. The priest has a scotch. And the bartender says to the rabbit, "What will you have?" The rabbit says, "Me? Nothing. I'm only here because of autocorrect." Well, sometimes I feel like I'm only here because we're going through some kind of autocorrect in life and in the world that we're in today. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to be here like this. Whether it's good or it's not good, it's not what we want. We really want what we had. And the world we live in today has started throughout the last little while to show some cracks that have always existed but are now bubbling up, and we need to talk about them. We need to talk about the question of racism. We need to talk about it because it's deeply rooted in our tradition against it, and it's also deeply rooted in our human psyche for it. And I want to ask you, do you know anyone who has lost a loved one or is sitting Shiva now? And during the pandemic, do you know anyone? I do. I told you, I know lots of people. I know a lot of people who died from COVID. I know a lot of people who have just passed away from old age or various other tragedies and illnesses. I think almost everybody knows somebody. Rabbi David Wolpe wrote an article published in The Atlantic called "The Whole World is Sitting Shiva." Everybody knows somebody. If you don't, you're really lucky. Now ask yourself, do you know anybody who's incarcerated? Anyone in jail? Do you? In the Jewish community, you're likely to answer no. Maybe there's the odd person you know of. Do you know more than one? Unlikely. And if we were the so-called black community, the percentage of incarcerated blacks, and we're using American statistic to make the point, is 20% of young men are incarcerated at any given time. Give or take, the numbers are, maybe 17, maybe 20, depends on which numbers. So you've 20% of young black men are in jail. Do you think in the black community you can ask someone, do you know anybody in jail? What do you think they're going to say? Yes. Just like we know everyone in our community and we know who's sitting Shiva and who's lost a loved one, they know somebody in jail. That should just sort of give us a sense of how different our world perspective is. And I need to tell you that there's a huge difference between prejudice and racism. Prejudice is what happens when somebody looks at someone else and thinks they understand them. They prejudge them. Racism is when we prejudge and we act. Now, prejudice, you can act on your prejudice, but that's where it becomes racism. Our job is to take our prejudice, whether it's innate or was given to us by our families or our education or our religion, and our job is to take prejudice and not convert it into racism. And today, I am not going to talk to you about the politic around the protests. I am not going to discuss the violence. I'm not going to offer the trite, I stand with you. I'm not going to offer solutions for them. I'm not going to talk to you about whether Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic or not. I'm not going to talk to you whether the high-level platform of Black Lives Matter should have included the tropes against Israel. I think it was a terrible mistake. There's a great piece, I saw it on Facebook, maybe I'll get a chance to share it, by my friend Rabbi Ari Hart in Chicago, who writes about why he is out there supporting what's happening on the streets, even though he doesn't agree with the top-level Black Lives Matter and their anti-Semitic behavior. And it is mostly because Black Lives Matter to the people who are protesting is not a political movement. It's how they feel. And today I want to talk about how we feel and how we ought to feel and what we need to do to feel without becoming the story, because it is not about us. It's not about us telling them they're okay or we're okay with them. This is about an inside conversation about who we are and what we ought to be, so that when we are confronted with these conversations, we understand not what we can do, but what they need to do or they feel. And the sermon today was entitled, A Rose Among Thorns, Death by 1,000 Cuts. And this comes to us from Song of Songs. Yisrael, the people of Israel, are seen as a beautiful rose among thorns. And whoever plucks it has now put their hand into the garden. But in order to get that rose, you have to go through 1,000 thorns, and you're going to bleed. And the Jewish people, as the rose, have always been surrounded by the thorns, because every time we try to engage with our Jewishness, it's a risk. Wear a kippah. When I was a kid and I wore a kippah all the time, or a black hat, I was subjected to vicious racism all the time. Not a Shabbat would go by where someone wouldn't drive by in a car and throw something at us or honk the horn or shout some dirty kike slur at us. Every week, all the time. We came home from school, we walked alone, somebody would drive by and shout, scream, threaten. I didn't get used to it, but we learned to accept it. Jewish community has fought long and hard for an end to that kind of behavior. And we're extremely vigilant, and we're organized. And we have instant communication when there's been an act of violence, anti-Semitism, hate. But not every community has the kind of organization that we have. And just because I experienced racism does not mean that I've suffered ultimately because of it. I was pulled over a few years ago for making trying to think, whatever the statute was that I violated. It was either that I made a turn on a red, or that I didn't wait for a pedestrian to clear the intersection, which was a new law brought in recently. And at the end of the day, when I had a chance to engage with the officer, we went to court and so on, and the charges were ultimately dropped. It wasn't a big charge. I think I had to pay a little court cost. I asked him if the reason I was stopped was because I was in a fancy car in a bad neighborhood. He said, "Well, I can't say I stopped you because you were a fancy car in a bad neighborhood. But what I can say is, once I saw who you were in the car, I didn't want to go full bore on you." I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that if I'm a rabbi, maybe you're likely to think I'm in the neighborhood for nothing other than to pass through, which is true. But what if I wasn't? What if I was someone else? What if I was a man of color? What if? I don't know. I don't get stopped very often. I've had 2 speeding tickets in my entire life. I don't know. I don't have a lot of interaction other than positive interaction. I have a lot of wonderful things to say about the police. That's just me. I can't speak for you. But I want to ask you, how many of you know someone who's in jail? How many of you know someone who's been arrested? How many of you know someone who's been beaten up? How many of you, really? For all the numbers we have of incidents, how many of you had it yourself? So as I've always tried to do, I've tried to create some kind of textual context for the words I'm sharing with you. And today I want to focus on a powerful text that talks about the dominance of the political state of Israel. When Israel is in a powerful position, the Torah says in Deuteronomy, Yadcha be'oref oivecha. Your hands are on the neck of your enemy. You will subdue them. Now, the text is not talking about a chokehold. It's not talking about putting your knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes. It's talking about the military and political strength of a country who holds their enemies at bay because they have the kind of capacity as if they're putting their hands on their neck and defending and separating. But when Israel's weak, the enemy is on your neck. And this use of the metaphor struck me very deeply. And I have to tell you, I can't watch that video. I can't. And whatever went on there, whatever charges those officers face and whatever punishment they get and whatever happens, I'm more struck by the fact that if you really look at the numbers, you will find out that Milwaukee is one of the most racially divided cities in America. You will do the research and you will discover that the city force did not use their body cameras. The city force was mandated to use body cameras. The city force was mandated not to use chokeholds, not to put yadcha be'oref ovecha. Do not put your hands in that fashion on your enemy, so to speak. And law enforcement creates that dichotomy. But in Milwaukee, the death of George Floyd was not an accident. It was part of a system. It could have been corrected. There could have been different training. There will have to be different training. For this to change, we have to change our assumptions, our prejudices. We have to change our practices. Justice has to change. There are hugely progressive ideas that come out of the justice system. And many of them manifest right here about how an individual's racialized upbringing does affect sentencing and punishment, and how the justice system has the right to look at someone's environment and circumstance rather than just apply wholesale punishment. And I applaud that. There are things in the system I don't applaud. I do not applaud the obsession with legal guns being removed and illegal guns not being dealt with. I do not applaud the fact that people can go in and out of jail like a revolving door without some solution to what will happen next. But that's not for now. There has to be changes in hiring. We know the story of the single black doctor that graduates from U of T. Could it be that it's just coincidence? Probably not. There are other minorities, like Jews, who often represent a much larger group. Is it purely racism? I doubt it. Is it a system? Maybe. Is it something that trickles its way through society in all its manifestations? Absolutely. If you get rid of the SAT in California, what is going to happen? Are you going to have worse students? Or are you going to have a different pool of students who can now engage in the university system so you don't pre-stream people out of the system? Can you imagine? Can you imagine this? Whether you know someone who's sitting Shiva or someone in jail, how many of you know people between the age of 55 and 25 who have not earned a single dollar this year? Well, maybe not this year, the last 10 years. How many people do you know that are entirely unemployed? Don't earn any money, have no job, don't have a job to go to, can't get hired. Do you know anybody like that? I don't know. I know very few people who don't have jobs for that long. Most people I know get training, get jobs, do something. Is it fair to say that everyone who's not working is not working because of racial stereotypes, prejudice, racism? No, it's not fair. It's not true. But a hugely disproportionate number in the black community in the US, using their numbers, don't earn any money. It's not about fault. It's not about me standing here saying I'm responsible. It's not like the NFL coming out with their video saying, "You were right, we should have listened to you about racism." Well, you're probably a little bit scared now. You don't have a great product right now. There's nothing going on. And when you reopen, there's going to be a microscope on you, NFL. What have you done wrong? I don't know what you've done, NFL, but you know what you've done. I don't know whether Colin Kaepernick is not playing because of his stance in support of his rights, or he's just not a good enough quarterback. I don't know. I'm not a professional or an expert. I don't know the inside story there, but I know that the NFL has issued a mea culpa. I've watched many organizations now issuing their mea culpas. We are responsible. Well, I'm not responsible. Well, I am, actually. The words of Abraham Joshua Heschel about the Vietnam War were, "We are not all liable, but we are all responsible." Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not up to you to finish the work. This task of unraveling this systemic racism, lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, it's not for you to fix it. But v'lo ata ben chorin, you are not a free person to disengage. You have a responsibility. I have a responsibility. And I am willing to examine my responsibility in all of this. I'm not willing, however, to go and tell people words that I think they want to hear, because I don't have those words. Neither do I have the words to tell them that I think that the calls to abolish the police are absurd. Nor do I have the interest in dialoguing about signs I see, eat the rich. There's absurdity everywhere. But forget that. Move through it. Get past the politic. Get past the issue and ask yourself, who am I talking to? Are they all just angry because they were told to be angry? Is it possible? Al tadin et chavercha ad sheta'amod bimkomo. Do not judge your fellow person until you stand in their place. Did you read that article in Toronto Life? Did you read it? You can find it. About a young woman from a mixed race marriage, Jewish and black. And the differences between her life in the Jewish community and her life in her home community. It's must read. Not because it's Lashon Hara. We're not talking evil about anyone. I'm not judgmental. People make decisions in their lives. People make mistakes in their lives. People have good or bad marriages. People raise their children well. That is not what this is about. And it's not about name dropping. It doesn't matter which family. I couldn't care less. It's about the disparity of experience between one and the other. It's must read. You'll know where you fit into that story based on how you feel. Do not judge until you stand in their place. I asked my daughter, what if Daddy woke up and my skin was black? I don't think she understood the question. I mean, she understood that I was saying, would you judge me differently? But I don't think she comprehended that there's a reason for that to be the issue. We've been talking about it. Last Shabbat, I came home, and remember, I'm downtown, and we see helicopters everywhere. It's like a scene from Apocalypse Now, everywhere. And the neighbors were all out there talking, and there's helicopters. Someone says, oh, there's a march. We look up at Bloor Street, which is 100 meters away. And there's this march. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. We go up to see it. And I invited Allegra to come see it. My wife and I were standing there. And I'm not going to comment at all about who was marching. There's all types. I don't know. I don't know most of these people. I don't know their stories. Sure, you could be a rich white kid up there feeling bad. This could be your slacktivism where you just march and you feel like you've done something. This could be someone who's crying out for help. This could be someone who lost a loved one because of racism or brutality. It was painful. It was painful to know that something has sparked this outrage and it needs to be resolved. It cannot just be swept under the carpet. We cannot wait for it to pass. Now, I agree with you. Canada and the United States are not the same place. And whether we talk about whether it's similar or different or statistics or numbers, at the end of the day, the origin of American racism might be rooted in a different conversation about slavery. The origin of Canadian racism is rooted actually in the same thing that the United States in, which is racism. in the United States, there's a bigger unresolved ache. In Canada, it's growing. There are many Canadians of color who will tell you they've done just fine. I need to ask you, though, for those who have done just fine, and for us as a community, the Jewish community, who have done just fine, we can argue we achieved it without violence, we can achieve it however, but don't let that distract you. What this is about, at the end of the day, is who are you hiring? How do you understand societal roles? When you see the driver of the car, do you still associate the car with someone else? And, oh, that's an anomaly. It's a black man in a BMW. Did you ever think that? The lawyer, the doctor, the rabbi. There are many, many Jews of color out there. I went to school with a family that were biracial. And the torment that these people were put through just because they were half black. That's the only cause. They were just regular, ordinary kids. But the fact that they were biracial was enough of a reason. It distorted them and disturbed them and hurt them for a very long time. Doug Hartman, the chairman of the University of Minnesota's sociology department, was interviewed. And he told the Star Tribune that we so don't want to believe that we are racist. We want to believe so much that we are not racist. So much so that we do not even see the way that race still matters. We are not violent, angry, hurtful, deliberate racists. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about how we're all liable in the sense that we're all guilty, we've all committed racist acts. I'm not saying that. Part of that is because we don't see it anymore. We just assume that we've gained rights, we've gained privilege, we've taken the marrow out of the bone of Canada, and we are free to practice our religion. We're free to be who we want to be. We're free to have a political voice. We're free to act. We're free to succeed. We're free. We just assume everyone else is. We just don't see it the way they do. The deep listening that we're working on now, that is what's happening. Deep listening means listening like in Shema. Shema doesn't mean to listen. It means to hear. Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. Hearing might require change. Because if you truly hear somebody, you might need change. And if you want the microcosm of this dialogue, just look at Israel. Look at the statistics for Ethiopians. Look at the poverty level. Look at the rate of incarceration. Look at the rate of unemployment. It's real. It's not shameful. It's our work as people. This is what we do. We come into this world, whether you believe racism is innate or it's taught, and our duty and our job is to eviscerate the mind from the stereotype. It is our duty to enter our own bad places and clean them. That is our job. That is what we do as human beings. Human beings have the capacity to change. We are not animals. We're not pre-programmed. And if we don't change, well, we might live just happy lives, But one thing is for sure, we will not fulfill our responsibility as human beings in our short journey on this planet. And definitely, we cannot leave that legacy for our children. And I am not here, as I told you, to tell you how to change. But in the heart of hearts, don't be afraid to talk to yourself. And most importantly, don't be afraid to listen. Really listen. Beyond the politic. Beyond the stereotypes. Beyond the violence. Beyond the fakers. Beyond Antifa. Beyond Trump. Beyond everything. Don't get caught up in the stuff. It's not even a symptom anymore. It's just a reality. I want to leave you with two things today. The first, one of my favorite authors, John Steinbeck. I want to share the quote from The Grapes of Wrath, which if you don't know the book, now's a good time to read it. And the second thing I want to share with you is a little film I made. And that film includes my friend Rabbi Ari Hart, I mentioned earlier, in Chicago. It includes a number of texts from the Torah that I could spend time talking about here, but I could package it and put all my thoughts in one place. You'll see the words of Rabbi Joachim Prince, 1963, Abraham Joshua Heschel. You'll see Martin Luther King. But most importantly, you will see the text of our tradition telling us not to let our humanity devolve into something that is hateful, racist, or unloving. Ma de'alecha snei, what you don't like, don't do to your fellow. It's the opposite of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor, your friend, your fellow. 36 times in the Torah, 36, we are told to love the stranger, the convert, the other. 3 times in the Torah, we are told not to eat milk and meat together. Twice in the Torah, we are told not to eat pork. What makes you a good Jew? Not eating pork or caring for the other? The Grapes of Wrath, 1939. John Steinbeck writes, there is a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There is a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There is a failure here that topples all our success. In the eyes of the hungry, there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy. Growing heavy for the vintage. Shabbat Shalom. Please enjoy this little film. It's powerful. It's my soul. I'm sharing it with you. The year was 1963. The civil rights movement was growing to attain full equality for Black America, and Rabbi Joshua Heschel gave a speech titled Religion and Race. Some excerpts from the speech. My heart is sick when I think of the anguish and the sighs, of the quiet tears shed in the nights, in the overcrowded dwellings in the slums of our great cities, of the pangs of despair, of the cup of humiliation that is running over. The crime of murder is tangible and punishable by law. The sin of insult is imponderable, invisible. When blood is shed, human eyes see red. When a heart is crushed, it is only God who shares the pain. The prophet's great contribution to humanity was the discovery of the evil of indifference. The greatest heresy is despair. Despair of humanity's power for goodness, humanity's power for love.